And joining us in the studio to ventilate this matter further is Hendrik Makaneta, Director for Media and Alumni Affairs at Higher Education Transformation Network. And Zanele Lwane is Deputy President of Black First, Land First. And Chris Malimaja is with Sanko, the Gauteng Provincial Chairperson. Good evening to you and thanks so much for joining us. At face value, is it really about the protection of a language policy that has been in place since time immemorial, that the school is entitled to preserve? Rema Kaneta, we'll start with you.
Well, it appears as if now the school is trying to use the language policy to really exclude students. You know, that is the only thing. In actual fact, this reminds me now of the court case that took place in the University of Free State, where the university managed to maintain that English will be the language of instruction. But now in this case, the department is arguing that, yes, let Afrikaans be there, but let us have a dual medium so that those English learners are catered for. So it appears as if now the school really wants to exclude those who are not fluent in Afrikaans. And we think that that goes against the spirit of the Constitution of the Republic, as well as the right to learn of students, particularly those who come from or those who cannot speak Afrikaans.
Chris Malimaja, South African National Civic Organization, Gauteng Provincial Chairperson. Good evening to you and thanks for joining us. Is this one of those historical pieces of legislation that the ANC ought to have dealt with, so that 23 years down the line we're not looking at the segregation of learners based on language?
Thank you very much, and to the viewers and to all corners where the ANC are. Let me put it this way. I think we are just confusing ourselves. The school policy, the school constitution cannot supersede the constitution of the country. And they cannot even supersede the SASA itself. In this case, what needs to be corrected is to call the SGB. They come with their language policy and their school policy together with their school, what's called policy. Then it be corrected, because only the NEC can say this policy can stand. Even the matter of taking it to court, I don't understand, but I don't want to go there. But I'm telling you that this school is in South Africa, governed by the South African Constitution, so they've got not even a single leg to can stand. What needs to happen is for the NEC to give instruction to them and say, as per the Constitution of the country, this school has to ensure that this is not becoming a tool to segregate other learners. For an example, the catchment of that particular school, kids are saying, we are not supposed to walk such stretch distance, whereas there's a nearby school. There's no one who can stand up and say, you cannot come here because you can't speak Afrikaans. I don't think that is correct, and that must ever be allowed.
Please stay on the line, Rema Limaja. We also have Zanele Lwane in studio. Just in terms of the burden that we've seen on the judiciary, including now at school level, with the Gauteng Department of Education on a number of occasions has to go and answer to the courts as to why they feel that there is discrimination and exclusion of students. Is there deliberate resistance in your view, especially in this particular case where Afrikaans learners or teachers or even the school governing body may not want integration?
Perhaps we need to make it quite clear again that South Africa is first and foremost a black country, and the majority of citizens, including learners in this country, are black. Insisting on using Afrikaans as a medium of instruction is exclusionary in its nature, right? And looking at a country with the history of colonialism and apartheid and the symbolic meaning of insisting on educating, you know, natives of this country in a colonial language, a brutal language such as Afrikaans, is very undermining and is very arrogant from the whites who are running that school and in their insistence on undermining educational institutions of this particular country. In fact, this takes us back to 1976, whereas the generation of 1976 who shouted black power, not dealing with the same problem that we are still dealing with now in 2018, 24 years into democracy, right? Where the apartheid government was arrogantly imposing Afrikaans in a black country as a medium of instruction. So it's very problematic, but also it's very important for us to extend the conversation and ask the relevant questions. What gives the Afrikaners who run that school, who are settlers, the arrogance to do this? Why? Because they own the land, they own the economy, they own the country, they own the constitution that they are even misinterpreting today. Why is this happening? We should also ask, why do we have Orania, for example, in a black country such as South Africa? So we, as Black First, Land First, we are not even saying, or rather making a comparison, rather, between English and Afrikaans. They are both colonial. But as blacks, we have already been subjected to be able to communicate in a colonial language such as English, right? So that we can be able to integrate into society. Yeah. Here you are now with your arrogance telling us to learn in Afrikaans in a black country. You are undermining us, and we should treat it that way, and we support that, again, the Department of Education of Gauteng in opening doors for these learners.
Yeah, and Rema Kanete, in your view, is it because of the lack of entrenching reconciliation, getting to that nuance of a united South Africa that will preserve the rights of all who live in it, including minority rights, that has now superseded what the desires of the general populace is?
Yeah, I think that, unity and cohesion is something that is, evasive. And this is something that we still have a long way as a country to try and build our communities to ensure that, we become that, that dream of Nelson Mandela. It's a good thing. This is the year of Nelson Mandela. And we believe that, this is something that we need to take forward to ensure that, the National Democratic Revolution is revived. Because one of the primary objectives of the National Democratic Revolution is to ensure that we build a united, non-racial, non-sexist society, which will be able to exist in harmony. And, the issue of space that they're advancing, obviously these are scapegoats to try and evade that dream, because we are informed that there are 21 classrooms in that school. And if you look at the current number of about 840 learners who are already there, if it's a matter of, a class can have about 40 learners if you divide 840 by 21. And the department is sending 55. If you divide that 55 by the number of classes, 21, it gives you 3 per class, which means that you can put an additional 3 learners in a classroom, which can make it 43 each. So, and again, it's a good thing that the department is sending in resources. They don't just leave them there. Teachers are coming in, those who are able to teach in English and so on. So I think that this dream may evade us if we are not careful. This is something that, a project that we must undertake to ensure that at the end of the day, our students are able to coexist in various institutions.
And Mr. Malimaja, just as communities as well, how do we eradicate these superficial barriers or boundaries, all in the veneer or disguise of preservation of language, and in this case, Afrikaans?
Thanks. I think here the government must just stand firm and ensure that we don't even babysit such behavior. There's no way that when the government says, I'm going to give nearly everything that I think it might be a problem, then you want to come and tell the government that we don't want this and we want this. I fully agree there with one member in the studio there. That is like, they have developed this attitude, this arrogance to the extent that they can tell the government or they can tell their own boss what must be done and what must not be done. The only way to deal with this is to be firm and ensure that the government goes there and tell them that as of now, if you don't have enough classroom, here are the classroom. If you don't have enough teachers, here are the teachers. These learners are going to be accommodated here. And if you don't take what we are saying, we are going to disband the following. The management itself must be disbanded. The non-racial, non-discrimination, non-sexist kind of school that's supposed to run.
Yeah, but
Because
what
if we
happens in
don't
the
do-
meantime, Malimaja, in the sense that we obviously have to wait for policy reform and to do things by the law, these things are then perpetuated as the argument that we ought to be looking at the decolonization of our education system, period. Because even to this day, in some Model C schools, if you don't have Afrikaans as a major, you then are not promoted to the next class.
I don't think it has to do necessarily with the government. It has to do with all of us here. It is not only Afrikaans that's supposed to be a barrier. We are saying Afrikaans can be taught throughout the school of South Africa, and other 8 languages must be the same. Any school that is using that particular aspect, I think that particular school must be visited, and those policies must be changed. But what really makes me to wonder is this thing. My understanding is that the policy of the school, the constitution of the school, are signed by the district directors and the LEC. In this case, one can ask, who signed and who gave permission of that particular policy in that particular school? Because what must be known is that you draft a policy at a school, you send it to district, the district agree after they've checked whether it is not in contrary with the country's constitution. It's what it says in the SASA itself. So these people are trying to create their own territory in our very same South Africa. Therefore, we cannot allow that. Equals to what you said. Any school that is using Afrikaans as a barrier for other people not to come, I think that particular school must be monitored and ensure that is corrected.
Zanele, in your view, is it that there's too much autonomy, even, or maybe from a desktop approach, that national basic education should be looking at all these things or excuses, scapegoats of why kids are not admitted into school? Or do you think that there is just lack of control? You know, we saw with the Western Cape, where a ruling was made that alcohol may be served at certain schooling events, which went against what the National Department had permitted. So is there lack of control? Is there, who's actually in charge here?
I'm of the view that the government, and in particular the Gauteng Education Department, and by the way, I'm speaking from the perspective of being an educator myself, right, is totally in control. But now we are dealing with a clear case of racism. We are dealing with a clear case of arrogance, and the language policy is being used to try and cover up what they are trying to do and exclude as much learners as they can. They are complaining about capacity. We know capacity, we teach overcrowded rooms, we make plans, we produce results at the end of the year. They want to exclude our children and tell us about capacity. It's totally disrespectful. And I believe the office of Mr. Panyaza Lisufi must be very clear and direct with the school and tell them that you are going to accommodate these learners, whether you like it or not, and you are going to make sure that you create a conducive environment for these learners to be able to learn just like other kids. This is a clear case of racism, and we must fight it, and we must fight it every way. It shows its ugly head, and again, it goes back to the question of property relations. Settlers today are able to run to courts and tell us all these kinds of explanations that they don't make sense. They own the economy, they own the land, they own the schools themselves, they own the culture, a colonial culture that they perpetuate. Kids who go to these schools who are black feel so outside, they are traumatized because of a culture that they perpetuate, and we must be very strict. We are in control, we are in government, we are not going to be dictated to, and those kids must be taught, and we must just advance the fight to transform this country. And without resolving the land question, the economy, then even language policy and the issues of language become a fallacy, really.
Yeah, but in this case, the courts will then be the final arbiter as to who is in the right, and obviously it would have to be based on the law. Yeah. What would the court have to consider in this case going forward, in your view, Rema Kanete?
Well, obviously the court will have to take into cognizance both arguments for the state, the department, as well as the school, looking at the policy, the existing policy of the school. And whatever outcome of the court comes out, whether on Friday, it's something else. But I'm saying that in the long run, a process has been initiated now to try and take away the powers of making policy and admission policy, which now rests with the SGBs. And you'll remember that school government bodies historically, if you are in a suburb, obviously those people who reside there, parents, are the ones who came up with these difficulties to try and block those members who are not, who do not form part and parcel of their majority, in this case, Afrikaans speaking communities. But we do hope that MEC Panyaza Lesufi is on the right track to bring about radical change within the schooling system. And in 2 years, 3 years' time, I don't think that will face this kind of problems. Because now, once the head of department takes over on some of these things, then it will make it easier for us to really transform them.
Yeah, but what about those far-flung places where parents may not have access to the media, they don't have a voice, and there may not be litigation in trying to intervene on their behalf? Malemaja, I mean, what are we saying to what seems to be a very desperate situation? If a school says to you, we regret your child has not been admitted, where do you go if your case is not necessarily sitting in front of court?
I think it's easy. Parents must not confront that particular school to go and cause chaos. What they need to do is to go to the district. At the district is where the authority will come and meet. They will present their case. Because all what we don't want to see is chaos or disturb any other learner. Remember here, those who are already admitted and those who are not admitted, they are equally the same. So we don't need to discriminate on that because it's not their action, it's their parents or their bodies which is doing that. So the advice will be, say, go to the district and stay at the district. The department, MEC, the chairperson, they will come and meet them there. They will take the matter as they're doing it now.
All right, we're going to have to let you go. Chris Malemaja, South African National Civic Organization, Gauteng Provincial Chairperson. We'll wrap it up here in studio. Should we scrutinize the criteria of admission even? Because on one part it could be language, on another it could be the pencil test, if in terms of your race, etc. But under the disguise of a policy that the school is trying to uphold.
We know that the Afrikaners of AfriForum who run these schools, they hide behind the constitution, they hide behind the courts to perpetuate an environment of inequality and of unfairness in many institutions, including the schools. And really, I think there's no other solution really than to advance the fight, to really put black people in a position where we can finally feel like we own this country, because we are not at that point now. That's why we can have these cases, and the court tomorrow might even rule in favor of the school, and then we might have to live with that reality. So we must advance the fight, but our people who are in influential positions, such as the MEC of Education in Gauteng, must be strict, must deal with these schools. No kid must be excluded on the basis of they are not white enough, basically, or Afrikaner enough. Everyone must be given the right to education. It's enshrined in the constitution of this country, and we must frown upon the arrogance and act, most importantly.
And it just said, in wrapping up, the challenges again where the school has almost sole control and independence in evaluating your child, what their abilities are, or whether they have certain disorders, and you're not afforded a second opinion. Again, these are challenges that parents are facing. Where do you even go if you feel that you are aggrieved and you're being unfairly discriminated on?
Yeah, I think government must take practical steps, as they've already started now, to reach out to those schools, not only Afrikaans schools, but also across the board, to make sure that schools are in line with what we stand for, the vision of the country, that of creating a non-racial society. And one other thing is, the so-called, you'll remember that Swart Gefar, where, the Afrikaans as community was always, or has always been afraid of, mixing with black people. I think government must do more to reach out to them. I don't think that a lot has been done to date to ensure that at the end of the day, our students are able to study without any problem.
But who's created that perception of the Swart Gevaar?
Obviously, it's those who have the means, you know, own the means of production, because they are the ones who stand to lose a lot, you know, when transformation kicks in. And what is important is that dream of Nelson Mandela must not die. You know, the dream that he started in 1994 of ensuring that, you know, unity and cohesion must exist within the country.
Yeah,
I'm
we live by
arguing that,
faith.
you know, we need to revive it.
We live by faith. Thanks indeed. Aluta continua. Much appreciated. That's Hendrik Makineta, Director for Media and Alumni Affairs at Higher Education Transformation Network, and Zanele Luana, Deputy President of Black First Land First, Chris Malimaja, South African National Civic Organization, as their provincial chairperson. We're back after this.